1,000 Miles Up the Nile, Section 4. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. 1,000 Miles Up the Nile by Amelia B. Edwards. Chapter 2, Cairo and the Mecca Pilgrimage, Part 1. The Mosque of Sultan Hassan, confessedly the most beautiful in Cairo, is also perhaps the most beautiful in the Muslim world. It was built at just that happy moment when Arabian art in Egypt, having ceased merely to appropriate or imitate, had at length evolved an original architectural style out of the heterogeneous elements of Roman and early Christian edifices. The mosques of a few centuries earlier, as for instance that of Toulon, which marks the first departure from the old Byzantine model, consisted of little more than a courtyard with colonnades leading to a hall supported on a forest of pillars. A little more than a century later, and the national style had already experienced the beginnings of that prolonged eclipse which finally resulted in the bastard Neo-Byzantine Renaissance represented by the Mosque of Mehemet Ali. But the Mosque of Sultan Hassan, built 97 years before the taking of Constantinople, may justly be regarded as the highest point reached by Saracenic art in Egypt, after it had used up the Greek and Roman material of Memphis, and before its newborn originality became modified by influences from beyond the Bosphorus. Its preeminence is due neither to the greatness of its dimensions nor to the splendor of its materials. It is neither so large as the great mosque at Damascus, nor so rich in costly marbles as St. Sophia in Constantinople, but in design, proportion, and a certain lofty grace impossible to describe, it surpasses these, and every other mosque, whether original or adapted, with which the writer is acquainted. The whole structure is purely national. Every line and curve in it, and every inch of detail, is in the best style of the period of the Arabian school. And above it, it was designed expressly for its present purpose. The two famous mosques of Damascus and Constantinople having, on the contrary, been Christian churches, betray evidence of adaptation. In St. Sophia, the space once occupied by the figure of the Redeemer may be distinctly traced in the mosaic work of the apse, filled in with gold tesserae of later date, while the magnificent gates of the great mosque at Damascus are decorated, among other Christian emblems, with the sacramental chalice. But the Mosque of Sultan Hassan, built by Nasir Hassan in the high and palmy days of the Memluk rule, is marred by no discrepancies. For a mosque it was designed, and a mosque it remains. Too soon it will be only a beautiful ruin. A number of small streets having lately been demolished in this quarter, the approach to the mosque lies across a desolate open space littered with debris, but destined to be laid out as a public square. With this desirable end in view, some half-dozen workmen were lazily loading as many camels with rubble, which is the Arab way of carting rubbish. If they persevere, and the Minister of Public Works continues to pay their wages with due punctuality, the ground will perhaps get cleared in 8 or 10 years' time. Driving up with some difficulty to the foot of the great steps, which were crowded with idlers smoking and sleeping, we observed a long and apparently fast-widening fissure reaching nearly from the top to the bottom of the main wall of the building, close against the minaret. It looked like just such a rent as might be caused by a shock of earthquake, and being still new to the East, we wondered the government had not set to work to mend it. We had yet to learn that nothing is ever mended in Cairo. Here, as in Constantinople, new buildings spring up apace, but the old, no matter how venerable, are allowed to moulder away, inch by inch, till nothing remains but a heap of ruins. Going up the steps and through a lofty hall, up some more steps and along a gloomy corridor, we came to the great court, before entering which, however, we had to take off our boots and put on slippers brought for the purpose. The first sight of this court is an architectural surprise. It is like nothing one has seen before, and its beauty equals its novelty. Imagine an immense marble quadrangle, open to the sky and enclosed within lofty walls, with, at each side, a vast recess formed in by a single arch. The quadrangle is more than 100 feet square, and the walls are more than 100 feet high. Each recess forms a spacious hall for rest and prayer, and all are matted, but that at the eastern end is wider and considerably deeper than the other three, and the noble arch that encloses it, like the proscenium of a splendid stage, measures, according to Ferguson, 69 feet 5 inches in the span. It looks much larger. This principal hall, the floor of which is raised one step at the upper end, measures 90 feet in length and 90 in height. The dais is covered with prayer rugs, and contains the holy niche and the pulpit of the preacher. We observed that those who came up here came only to pray. Having prayed, they either went away or turned aside into one of the other recesses to rest. There was a charming fountain in the court, with a dome roof as light and fragile-looking as a big bubble, at which each worshipper performed his ablutions on coming in. This done, he left his slippers on the matting, and trod the carpeted dais barefoot. This was the first time we had seen Moslems at prayer, and we could not but be impressed by their profound and unaffected devotion. Some lay prostrate, their foreheads touching the ground, others were kneeling, others bowing in the prescribed attitudes of prayer. So absorbed were they that not even our unhallowed presence seemed to disturb them. We did not then know that the pious Moslem is as devout out of the mosque as in it, or that it is his habit to pray when the appointed hours come round, no matter where he may be or how occupied. We soon became so familiar, however, with this obvious trait of Mohammedan life, that it seemed quite a matter of course that the camel-driver should dismount and lay his forehead in the dust by the roadside, or the merchant spread his prayer carpet on the narrow mastaba of his little shop in the public bazaar, or the boatman prostrate himself with his face to the east, as the sun went down behind the hills of the Libyan desert. While we were admiring the spring of the roof and the intricate arabesque decorations of the pulpit, a custodian came up with a big key and invited us to visit the tomb of the founder. So we followed him into an enormous vaulted hall 100 feet square, in the center of which stood a plain, railed-off tomb with an empty iron-bound coffer at the foot. We afterwards learned that for 500 years, that is to say, ever since the death and burial of Sultan Hassan, this coffer had contained a fine copy of the Koran, traditionally said to have been written by Sultan Hassan's own hand, but that the Khedive, who is collecting choice and antique Arabic manuscripts, had only the other day sent an order for its removal. Nothing can be bolder or more elegant than the proportions of this noble sepulchral hall, the walls of which are covered with tracery in low relief encrusted with discs and tesserae of turquoise-colored porcelain, while high up, in order to lead off the vaulting of the roof, the corners are rounded by means of recessed clusters of exquisite arabesque woodwork, like pendant stalactites. But the tesserae are fast falling out, and most of their places are vacant, and the beautiful woodwork hangs in fragments, tattered and cobwebbed, like time-worn banners which the first touch of a brush would bring down. Going back again from the tomb to the courtyard, we everywhere observed traces of the same dilapidation. The fountain, once a miracle of Saracenic ornament, was fast going to destruction. The rich marbles of its basement were cracked and discolored, its stuccoed cupola was flaking off piecemeal, its enamels were dropping out, its lace-like wood traceries shredding away by inches. Presently a tiny brown and golden bird perched with pretty confidence on the brink of the basin, and having splashed and drunk and preened its feathers, like a true believer at his ablutions, flew to the top of the cupola and sang deliciously. All else was profoundly still. Large spaces of light and shadow divided the quadrangle. The sky showed overhead as a square opening of burning solid blue, while here and there, reclining, praying, or quietly occupied, a number of turbaned figures were picturesquely scattered over the matted floors of the open halls round. Yonder sat a tailor cross-legged, making a waistcoat. Near him, stretched on his face at full length, sprawled a basket-maker with his half-woven basket and bundle of rushes beside him. And here, close against the main entrance, lay a blind man and his dog, the master asleep, the dog keeping watch. It was, as I have said, our first mosque, and I well remember the surprise with which I saw that tailor sewing on his buttons, and the sleepers lying about in the shade. We did not then know that a Mohammedan mosque is as much a place of rest and refuge as of prayer, or that the houseless Arab may take shelter there by night or day as freely as the birds may build their nests in the cornice, or the blind man's dog may share the cool shade with his sleeping master. From the mosque of this Memluk sovereign it is but a few minutes uphill drive to the mosque of Mehemet Ali, by whose orders the last of that royal race were massacred just 64 years ago. This mosque, built within the precincts of the citadel on a spur of the Makadam hills overlooking the city, is the most conspicuous object in Cairo. Its attenuated minarets and clustered domes show from every point of view for miles around, and remain longer in sight as one leaves or returns to Cairo than any other landmark. It is a spacious, costly, gaudy, commonplace building, with nothing really beautiful about it except the great marble courtyard and fountain. The inside, which is entirely built of Oriental alabaster, is carpeted with magnificent Turkey carpets and hung with innumerable cut-glass chandeliers, so that it looks like a huge, vulgar drawing-room from which the furniture has been cleared out for dancing. The view from the outer platform is, however, magnificent. We saw it on a hazy day, and could not therefore distinguish the point of the delta, which ought to have been visible on the north, but we could plainly see as far southward as the pyramids of Saqqara, and trace the windings of the Nile for many miles across the plain. The pyramids of Giza, on their dais of desert rock about 12 miles off, looked as they always do look from a distance, small and unimpressive, but the great alluvial valley dotted over with mud villages and intersected by canals and tracts of palm forest, the shining rivers speckled with sails, and the wonderful city, all flat roofs, cupolas, and minarets, spread out like an intricate model at one's feet, were full of interest and absorbed our whole attention. Looking down upon it from this elevation, it is easy to believe that Cairo contains 400 mosques, as it is to stand on the brow of the Pincio and believe in the 365 churches of modern Rome. As we came away they showed us the place in which the Memluk nobles, 470 in number, were shot down like mad dogs in a trap, that fatal 1st of March, A.D. 1811. We saw the upper gate which was shut behind them as they came out from the presence of the Pasha, and the lower gate which was shut before them to prevent their egress. The walls of the narrow roadway in which the slaughter was done are said to be pitted with bullet marks, but we would not look for them. I have already said that I do not very distinctly remember the order of our sightseeing in Cairo, for the reason that we saw some places before we went up the river, some after we came back, and some, as for instance the museum at Bulaq, both before and after, and indeed as often as possible. But I am at least quite certain that we witnessed a performance of howling dervishes and the departure of the caravan for Mecca before starting. End of section 4.